Hi, Misha here, and kind of keeping on with Pocket Pistol Wednesday, we're going to look at quite a rare and interesting variant type gun that you may or may not have heard of. Last time we looked at the rather famous John Moses Browning FN 1906 and Colt 1908. Well, we're kind of flipping it this time, looking at the Simson Company, Simson Co., model 1926. Now this is a little bit interesting for its mechanical properties and for the fact that it is a wholly original design for the most part. It's not a copy or a clone of anything, but it's also quite interesting for the whole history of the Simson Company itself. And in this video we're just really going to focus on this little gun here, but I will do a longer video sometime on the company from its beginnings in the 19th century into the East German period. Well, sort of, kind of. But today, on Vest Pocket Wednesday, we're going to look at this little guy. This is, of course, a simple blowback gun, chambered for 6.35, 25. Single action only, striker fired. But before we can really talk about it, we have to talk about the pistol 1908, the P08, Parabellum, the Luger. Because this is really where the interwar Simson story begins. The Cliff Notes version for this video, we'll, like I said, do a longer video later. After the Great War, of course, there was the Allied Commission to disarm and reorganize Germany, the Weimar Republic, and the old government arsenal at Erfurt was shut down. And that was pretty much where it was at. Millions of guns and parts were destroyed in the early 1920s, but the Weimar Republic's military, such as it was, more of a self-defense force, and police requested, because they had no choice, to get spare parts, replacement parts, mags, what have you, for their Lugers, as well as pick up some new Lugers, fresh examples that aren't left over from the war. The Allied Committee did allow this, but the old Erfurt arsenal was staying closed. Instead, production would be transferred to a private company, and bidding for the initial government contract was opened up. And this is where Simson comes in. They had built Gewehr 98s during the war, and they'd been a firearms manufacturer really going back to the 1860s. But they had not built Lugers during the Great War, World War I. And they were kind of into it. They actually had quite a good business in the auto industry and the motorcycle industry, not to mention sporting guns, shotguns, hunting guns, what I think of as beer garden guns. But they threw in a bid, and, they won it. So the old Erfurt tooling production line was transferred to Simson. It would have gone to whoever won the initial contract. Now, the production was transferred over between 1923 and 1924. And in 1925, the government placed an order for 10,000 pieces, mostly to go to the Army, border guards, what have you. And they looked like this World War I example. The only difference, Simson started doing an alloy base plate for the mag instead of the wood one. Otherwise, nice high-polished blued finish. Again, they're using the Erfurt tooling, so they very much resemble these. And they would build a few hundred pistols in 1925, and ultimately, over the next couple of years, produced just under 12,000 P08s. A couple of thousand going to the police, the rest going to the Army and other military. But this got them into pistol production. And thus we can talk about our little pocket today. Now, this little gun predates Luger production, at least the original version. This is known as the Model 1926, sometimes called the Model 1927. But there was an earlier version called the Model 1922 that really was a pre-production, if not even a prototype. Obviously from 1922. And the big difference, basically this version here was streamlined for mass production. The machining on the side was simplified, the slide serrations were simplified, and screws were added to the grips. Yeah, the original 22 had no screws at all. And this only has screws to hold the grips on. And they made a few little cosmetic changes and what have you, but yeah, the 22 is pretty rare. They only made around 2,200 of them, with serials ending around 2250, give or take. And so after that point, they switched over to this pattern here, the 26. Even then, you'll see some minor differences in production. The slide serrations change a few more times, maybe checkering on the safety, what have you. And it's quite interesting because they would build these from, like I said, a little over 2,200 up to serial number around 5,000, and then stop. And I have to kind of wonder, speculate, just because the numbers kind of line up, if that's because that's about when the Luger production was really ramping up in 1926. Either way, they would pick back up around serial number 20,000, running through around 35,000. We don't know how many of these little guns were ever made, but somewhere over 15,000 and probably under 20, including the early prototypes and the first version. So, what is this? Like I said earlier, it's not just the company's history, it is mechanically quite interesting. I think by now, looking at these pocket pistols every week, you kind of figure out this was a very popular commercial avenue for lots of gun makers in the interwar period. I should mention that Simson made Lugers were not commercial. They were for government contracts. But this was, well, for anyone. It's a pretty typical single action only. But notice how the slide as such, is pretty much this narrow little top part, and it's very cylindrical in a very high-sided frame. And we have an ejection port with extractor on the top. So that's already pretty different than what we've seen before from Browning and Walther. Pretty typical heel mag release with what looks to be a very standard 6-shot mag, although you might be able to squeeze in 7 if your spring's a little worn, but nothing really special on the mag. We have essentially hard rubber, vulcanite if you prefer, type grips, kind of the British term. We have a very simple trench style sighting groove with small internal notches. And we are a striker fired, not hammer fired system. And we have a pretty simple manual safety here. No magazine disconnect. Very standard manual safety, but instead of flipping it, you can flip it either which way. I don't know. I find it kind of interesting. Your mileage will vary. Now, when it seems like it's charged, you can't push it down, but you can flip it around. But then, it does that. But it doesn't act as a decocker. You think it would, because it does have that little ratchet there, that little click. I don't know. I think that's kind of a missed opportunity for a decock, but I do find the safety pretty unique on this. But one of the goals Simson Company had, aside from just making money and making a pocket gun, I mean, this is pretty average sized in weight. It's about 4.5 inches long, normal little barrel. It was to make it easier to disassemble than Browning's previous designs. And in some ways, it's kind of a modern style. There's actually a small catch in the trigger guard. And once you press it in, that just slides off. Very, modern-esque style of disassembly. You can see the end plate for the striker back there. It's actually quite a lightweight frame, which you might consider. And then our whole system is back here. Very standard striker and spring. Pretty beefy though, all things considered. And then you have your recoil here. If I can get it out. Not exactly something I'm very used to doing, I'll be completely honest with you. Okay, took a minute there. Interestingly, you actually take your barrel out as opposed to your spring. Usually you would want to, a typical gun. But no, there's actually this small catch here on the rod that hooks in the barrel. You press this, pull it out, and yeah, your barrel with this large lug comes out. And then we have a small catch on the slide up here with the hole. And as you see, it's pretty much a rounded tube, except for that front section, which would have made manufacturing quite a bit easier for that day and time, but it's elegant. I really do like how this gun works, and being a top eject, it's about as lefty friendly as you're going to find this day and time. Yeah. And here it is, laid out, disassembled. Hopefully you can see it. I just thought it was an interesting thing to bring to you. And 1927, 1928, things were going pretty well for Simson. In fact, because of their government contracts, they were really doing well. They sold some of these. They also had quite a bit of contracting work for replacement parts like barrels and spare mags for various things, not just Lugers, but some machine guns, rifles. They even made some of the new Kar 98Bs for the Weimar Republic. And of course, they were the only company that the Allied Committee was really allowing to make weapons for Weimar Republic. Everything else was not allowed except for export. This would be part of their downfall, not to mention the fact that from the get-go, when they were founded 80 years previous, they were a Jewish-owned and operated company, which should not have been a problem, but, well, World War II history, 1933, Nazis. You see where the issue comes from. But for a while, for a few years, they were kind of the best thing going in Thuringia, the area of Germany that Suhl, the city they were located in, or at least region, was located. Yeah, now that I kind of know what I'm doing, putting that back together, it just slides in. You get everything seated. And got our striker and spring. I always try to be careful with striker guns and not crimping springs if I can help it. And then back together. Again, a very modern disassembly. Even though it doesn't have a bevel mag well, and it's got our heel-mounted mag catch, to aid in extraction of the mag, we do have a scallop on the front strap. Not much going on the back strap. So, yes, of course, the Nazis coming in would wreck this. One of the very first things that other gun makers in the region did after Hitler took power in 1933 was complain that Simson had an unfair advantage because of external influences from the Allied Disarmament Committee. And this would eventually lead, of course, to the Jewish-owned factory being seized by the governor of Thuringia, Fritz Sokol, and actually the grandson of the original founder was Moses Simson. Arthur Simson was jailed for about half a year, and he was released under the condition that he would plead guilty to tax evasion, not paying his income taxes, and he would sign over the factory to the state. That was around 1935. and then Sokol would nationalize the Simson factory, and then it would be Aryanized as such, being renamed to BSW in 1936 or thereabouts. And if you don't recognize the name BSW, you might recognize the name Gustav work, which it was renamed to right before World War II kicked off in earnest as a tribute to a fallen Nazi party official from Switzerland, Wilhelm Gustav. And under the code BCD, the seized Simson factory would produce guns during World War II, at least until it was hit with a major bombing raid, which would severely curtail its production. And of course, its Lugers tooling line would be confiscated and go to Krieghoff, because it was decided that since it came from the Erfurt Arsenal, it was government property. So it was leased/loaned, given to the Krieghoff factory, who did their own thing, making more Lugers with that. So, yeah. But again, we'll cover that in more detail later on. As for these little guns, like I said, they ended serials around 35,000. The final ones were actually built not under the Simson banner with the S symbol, but actually under the new name of BSW up until about 1938, 1939, somewhere in that vicinity. But by World War II, aside from maybe putting some together from leftover parts, they were out of production. Not a whole lot of use for 6.35 mils during the Second World War. I should say that this was loosely used as a pattern for the model 1929, which was an upscaled version for 9x19, one of the earliest potential efforts to replace the P08, long before the program that would give us the P38 would come to be. So about half a decade before. But yeah, scale this up, chamber it for 9x19 parabellum, and you get the model 1929, including being a straight blowback gun, kind of like an Astra 400 or 600. Walther also did a blowback 9mm, known as the Model 6, during World War I, and even experimented with doing some 9mm parabellum blowbacks of the PP in the early 30s, but they never went anywhere. And neither did the larger, bigger brother of this, and obviously I don't have one. And I don't believe they really did many variations of this gun. I mean, with under 20,000 made total, what do you expect? In fact, I don't see any videos on YouTube about the Model 1926, or 27 if you prefer. And really about the only resource online for these specifically is the Unblinking Eye website I've referred to multiple times in these pocket guns. He seems like he's about the only one that seems to care about them. So when I was picking up this collection of pockets, this one definitely caught my attention in the list of guns he had, because you just don't see them, and it's a unique design. It'd be one thing if it were just a copy, or even something that's a few different things copied together, like that South African we looked at originally. But no, this is its own thing, and under different circumstances, I think I would kind of like it. It's got some refinements in it. It feels like a more modern gun than what we've looked at so far. But what do you think? Trying to keep these pocket videos reasonable length, because I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but these are historical relics, and I want to bring them to you while I have a chance. But again, if you'd like to know more about the Simson factory history, well, we'll do a video on that very soon. And if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to help support us, check out the link to Patreon. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.